This week on Brupeg we have another go at building an air compressor because we need a really good power supply of compressed air for our air starter on our new Cummins main engine, as well as our plasma cutter, sandblaster and any rattle tools that we need to use.
A special thanks goes out to George Thoma during our latest Patreon roundtable. He's a submariner and has lots of experience with tanks on submarines. He suggested multiple tanks to get that power that we need. Thanks, George.
So I started running, so I wouldn't be too late. I didn't think that I would ever see your face again, but I was wrong. Yeah, I was wrong. When I got close, my heart was pumping to the beat that was blasting through the night.
Just a little job. This is the cover from the Kubota. We've got to strip out the soundproofing, and that includes the lead. And I think it's time for an update on the Get Home motor. What is it? What does it look like? The mystery box is about to be unveiled.
This is a box that we ordered from eBay. It is our Get Home motor. We found this motor for a heck of a steal. Big reveal, here we go. Okay, I'll take the lid off first. Whoop whoop. That is our new Get Home motor. It's quite large.
I think it might be big. My gosh, that's gorgeous, isn't it? I can't believe the price you got this for.
So this is a 30 kilowatt ABB motor. Normally these retail for anywhere between $2,000 and $5,000 depending on specs. We found this one on eBay for $600 plus 120 freight. It's brand new. It's new old stock, so it's 2012. So it's not a late model engine, but it's plenty new enough for us. And it's never had any use. So this is going to do us absolutely perfect. We'll set this up in the engine room, and this is what's going to be driving our main prop shaft if our main engine or gearbox ever stops working properly. This is located in the engine room behind the gearbox and in front of the fuel filters that are in the engine room at the moment. It sits vertically in the engine room, and then there's a 90-degree gearbox which basically rotates the direction of output from being vertical to being horizontal. It also reduces it, so it's a 4-to-1 reduction gearbox. Then there's a belt drive system that reduces it further, between 3 and 3.5-to-1 belt drive. So overall we have a 12-to-1 reduction on this motor. It's a 3,000 RPM motor, and the propeller spins at what we need it to be. The propeller spins at 233 RPM. So this will get us about 5 knots of boat speed when this is running at 30 kilowatts, and the genset is able to run at 30 kilowatts indefinitely. So it's a 50 kilowatt genset, so even when it's hot we've still got plenty of headroom to be able to run a 30 kilowatt motor for as long as we need. It's actually going to be mounted up high, and there's going to be belts coming down to the prop shaft and then spinning back up to the Get Home motor. The reason we're putting it up there is we don't have enough physical space behind the gearbox and in front of those fuel filters. They're actually going to be moved because the generator is going to be sitting where that hot water cylinder is, and we don't know how much room that's going to take up. So we're assuming we physically don't have the space available for that Get Home motor to sit there, so that's why we're going up. We've got plenty of height, we don't have plenty of length. To give you context of where that is, that's the rear fuel tank on one side, the starboard side, and then over there on the port side we've got the second fuel tank. So each of those, between those two, is about 5,500 litres of fuel. They power down through these fuel filters and then off to the motor that normally is in this area of the boat. So this is going to be our primary form of very quiet motoring. This is also giving us the ability to eventually have the boat powered by solar, if we can generate enough solar and if we have enough battery capacity to be able to run this. It will be something that we work on over time. It's not going to be something that we're going to slap the boat together and hope to run off solar, but Jess has got heaps of plans with wings, additional solar, bifacial panels, batteries, like you name it. She's working with a couple of people to be able to figure out how to do it all, and it's going to be a long-term plan. But that's something that's in the back of our mind now that we've got an ability to power via electric. We can generate the electricity some other way rather than using fossil fuels to do that.
It takes an enormous amount of solar to do that, to power the boat directly running on this. We're not thinking about that. We're not thinking about running it 24 hours a day or anything. That's not possible right now. What is possible is supplementary power, and maybe even for just a blip in the middle of the day. If we've been at sea for a while, everyone's exhausted, we just need to be quiet and have a break but keep making progress. that would be a way to do it. So we're thinking this is a transitional boat in a way to alternative fuels and alternative power source, and we can't do it completely first pop, but we're just going to work our way at it. And just remember, it's all experimental. We don't care if we don't get there in the end in the way we dreamed. If we can get partially there, that's a win in our eyes anyway. A big thank you goes out to Daniel Griffith. Not only is he a patron, but he's been helping Damien sort out the Cummings, that's the old Cummings, the new Cummings, this Get Home motor. Damien and him have been back and forth for months, sorting out ideas and plans and figuring out the logistics. Thanks, Daniel, you've just been amazing. It's so soft. Amazing.
Lead, yeah, it's amazing, eh?
So just don't melt it and we're fine.
Yeah. Or lick it.
We'll lick it, don't lick it.
No melting or licking of the lead. So a thank you goes out to Bruce. He donated some parts. He works on a large commercial boat. They look like ball valves, but this bit doesn't. This is actually a spring-loaded ball valve. So they snap back when you're not using them, and these are used for sight glasses for fuel. So for survey, you're supposed to have a ball valve top and bottom on your sight glass on your fuel tank, but they're supposed to snap shut. So if you just have a regular ball valve, they'll stay open or closed depending on whatever you've set them to. Where the survey, you'll use something like this. This is a Zetco ball valve, and it'll basically spring itself shut when you're not using it. So it's just a safety feature that they have. He also gave us this. This is a 24 volt electro clutch. So this is something that's going to come in handy. We have a few plans and we need electro clutches, and this is absolutely perfect for what we need. So thank you so much for dropping this in, Bruce. It was awesome. So we've got a 24 volt electro clutch, and this is the shaft, the spline shaft that it runs on. There's a few anodes that he wasn't able to use on his boat, so he's given them to us to use. We've got two 1/2 inch spring loaded ball valves, and then a 1.5 inch, I think that is, spring loaded ball valve. So nice, as differentiated by the large handle, because it's quite a significant ball valve.
It was great to meet you, Bruce. Thank you for what you donated, and also your suggestions. They were great. Really, really great. So we're going to put some of those things in action. We don't agree that the dog's spoiled in any way, but we've just taken a detour, as we've been doing recently, for him. We're not sure what kind of Snoop was brought up on, but we're figuring it might have been cows. He gets so excited.
Just found this at the scrappy. That'll be our exhaust tip, so that's a 6 inch diameter curve and tip and everything, but angled like that it stops the rain being able to pile down the exhaust. It's all welded up quite nice too, like
flange and everything.
Yeah, TIG welded up. It's got nice CNC slots. It's lovely.
Can I look at the slots?
Yeah. See them?
Oh, lovely. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's really great. Really great. And this is why we decided to insulate. What's that? 48 degrees, 34 degrees Celsius. Let's see if I can do this in hieroglyphics. 180, or call it 119 Fahrenheit, 93, 94 Fahrenheit. So a bit of a difference. You've already seen me pull this thing apart, rebuild the tank, put this thing back together, stick it in here, and then decide that it's not going to be staying. So I'm not going to muck around and show you the whole disassembly process. I'm just going to compress that.
Don't you wanna play? Hold on, sugar, why you look so sad? Come on now, mama, ain't nothing here so bad. We got fast cars, movie stars, party on.
I'm glad that that's done. I didn't want to put too much pressure on myself. I've decided to go with a simple solution. 2 of these. This is a 88 litre LPG or propane if you're in America. They are pressure rated to 480 psi, so quite a bit more than what I'm going to be working with. There's no holes, dents, defects in these tanks. They're old. They've got a bit of like sort of shitty surface corrosion, dirt, scratches, bumps from a life of use, etc. But they're pretty functionally perfect. What I do plan to do, I don't know if I'll ever have time to do this, but I would love to get these assembled and built the way that I want to build them and mount them into the boat, and then sandblast and paint them so that they're not just this sort of scabby looking colour. I don't know if that bit's going to happen. I'd love for it to happen. But what I plan to do is cut all of this sort of stuff off. It's no longer needed. That's mainly to protect all the LPG gear and, you know, the valves and so on. Again, not needed in our case, and it also just wastes height. What I have measured up is this tank. Theoretically, if I get rid of the stand on the bottom and the stand on the top here, cut those off, that tank will fit vertically in the engine room, where a number of people commented when I built the stainless tank, a number of people said, why don't you mount it vertically? With that tank I couldn't, it was too long, I physically couldn't get it under the deck. But these ones, they're about 3 inches shorter and I can get them under. So I'm going to try and mount these guys basically vertical with the existing plumbing down the bottom. That's going to be my water drain. I also did a run to the scrappy and picked up a whole bunch of heavy wall mandrel bent stainless. So this is 3/4 of an inch. I think it's 1 inch OD, 3/4 of an inch ID, and this is quite a bit bigger. I don't know what this is, 1.25 ID, something like that. But basically what I'm thinking is, I don't know if I'll use this, but I'm thinking it gives me the option to link the tanks with some mandrel bent pipes and so on.
Double down, throw some dice, take off now, don't think twice, but hey, don't you want?
That's a bit shorter.
Baby, come on. Tell me where you want to go. Baby, I don't work down there anymore. No, I don't.
You can see that's a fair whack cleaner now, so put that in the engine room and we'll start mounting this. I'm about to lift this up and I just noticed something small but spyful. I'm thinking of sticking it vertical there. One problem I'm going to run into is this bracket here. That used to be for an old electrical switchboard that was in here. That needs to come out because that's pushing this tank too far outwards, and if I can get rid of that piece of angle iron, it means I can get the bottom of the tank about 6 inches closer to the hull. There we go, much better. Nothing hanging in the way now. So there we go, non-structurally mounted using a couple of bits of hardwood and a clamp, but I'll solid mount that in now with some brackets. I'll make some brackets up now so that we can put that in properly. You can see at the bottom, come right down, the original fitting is just sitting on that smaller bit of timber there. That's what the whole thing's balancing on, but there's still heaps of room, so I can put my fittings and stuff into the original fitting. I don't need to modify any of that. What I am thinking is I'll probably put a bigger pipe, like an 1.5 inch pipe, something like that at the top, with a ball valve going between this tank and whatever the next tanks are, so that they can be linked with a large pipe, so that there's heaps and heaps of flow if we need it via that. And then also that there is essentially just the drain basically, so all of the air coming in and out is going to be at the top and the drain's going to be right at the bottom. Right, I've made a few templates. These guys go on either side. You can sort of see roughly where they position on that beam, and then it's hard to see, but there's a rib that sort of runs vertical up there, and they go from that rib out to the tank. So there's 4 mounts on this tank. It's going to be solidly mounted, so we're not going to be rubber mounting this. This will be solidly mounted so that we, because there's no movement to be expected in this tank and there's no noise that's going to transmit into it easily, so no need to rubber mount that. We will, however, rubber mount the compressor. I'll just move those guys off to the side. They have no bearing on the project that we're going to complete here. What I need to do is make these little brackets, and I found a little bit of 75 by 6mm flat bar, which is going to work perfect. So my plan is to basically just trim these guys up like so. I need to find a little bit more because I've got 2 more to do. Then drill this out. That's going to be our mount, and there we have the mounts that I'm going to use. So I've rounded one edge of each of these 4 mounts. need to drill 2 holes in the rounded end, and that's going to be the end that bolts onto the rib, and then this flat end gets welded onto the tank. I was going to do 2 holes in each, but I realised I don't need to. 4 10mm bolts, more than enough to hold this cylinder. Rightio, the TIG is set up. I have a fan blowing, and I will turn that off when I start welding because it's very hot in here. But what I've got is the brackets. So they're just clamped up against the side of the tank for now. I'm just going to weld this one side and then move over and do the other side. But what I was thinking is get these welded in and drill and bolt this so that it's fixed. It's not going to move at that point, and then I can start mounting the far side, get that done so that we've got sort of no movement or flexibility in the system when we're trying to tack it all together. I'm rotating between like 3 or 4 t-shirts upstairs and my long sleeve. Long sleeve is only used for welding so I don't get burnt, but it's about probably 50 degrees in this room at the moment. It's stinking hot. So it takes about 3 seconds before you're comprised mostly of liquid. So I just had a ponder. There's probably about above 50% chance that I'm the person that's going to have to take this tank on and off several times. So what I was thinking is, rather than these bolts down here just going straight through and bolting them, what I thought is I'll put a bolt through from the back, I'll tighten it up with just a regular nut so it locks onto the boat, and then this will be essentially a locating dowel that the tank can then mount on, and then nylock on top of that and lock it up with a nylock. That's my plan anyway, see if it works. But if I do these 2 like that, I can't do the other side because they're sort of sideways bolted, if that makes sense, but these 2 will be able to I'll be able to mount it onto it, chuck the nuts on there, and it sort of it's not going to fall down, and then I can work on the back ones just with a regular bolt. So see if that's going to work. For now, I just need to bolt this one here so that I can get this one up the top drilled out.
My thoughts have never been clearer. I see what you're doing to me now. They lie, they steal, they fooled us. Deep down I probably knew this. Think I will be holding on to the one thing that I know is stronger. Love is blind and no one's perfect. Platinum seems so shallow, 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 shallow. But you are bright white gold.
The mounts are all tacked on now, so I'll go through and weld them up from the back.
They made us lose our focus. The very same hands that formed us. Go build a better tomorrow. For you I'd make it a rainbow.
So all mounts welded. You can see I've done a fairly sizable weld on that. That's 2 runs, 2 passes with the TIG. It's welding galv, something I absolutely hate welding. It's just a awful material to weld. It keeps sparking and throwing stuff back at you, and it's a pain to try and get it clean enough to ever TIG weld it. So next up I've got to fit this back onto the wall over the back there, so that I can then start getting in and positioning where I'm going to put the compressor head and the electric motor. Remember this wee fella? Time to chop it up.
Think I will be holding on to the one thing that I know is stronger. Love is blind and no one's perfect. Platinum seems so shallow.
With the tank in, it's time to start thinking about how to mount this plate that does the adjustment of the actual compressor head itself. Now, a couple of variations of thought. I'd love to put the second tank in this area here, keep them symmetrical, but the exhaust on this genset comes out exactly where the tank needs to sit. Now I've had a good look at the exhaust on this generator and I'm pretty confident that I can rotate it round and have it come out this side here. There's nothing that's going to get in the way, makes the exhaust simpler to build, so that's going to keep the two tanks nice and easy. Plumbing will be nice and symmetrical, it'll be just a better fit all round I think, and it makes it simple to put the compressor head down here and power both tanks. So I need to do a town run to grab some steel to make these mounts. Just driving home and I spotted this. Sad day for the fellas that own that boat.
These guys have had a sandbar that moved. The same thing happened to Brupeg before we got here. During the storm, the same thing happened. Brupeg hit the sandbar that had moved. With the current pushing it, it rolled sideways. It stayed like that for 2 months.
I'm using some 8mm flat bar to make some mounts on the front. They're going onto the original rubber mounts so that we can have this soft mounted, and then I'll build 2 gussets coming down from the bar at the back down onto the adjustment plate for the compressor. And that's why welding galvanised is the balls, and welding mild steel or stainless is awesome. There we go, rear mount tacked together. So that's going to be the layout that I'll use. I need to go and pull this out now and then weld everything properly, but that is getting closer and closer to something that I can mount the compressor on. You can see from right down low here that there's still plenty of room to put a second tank over the back there. It's going to be tight, but I'll be able to get it in.
What are you looking at, sweetheart? What are you doing? What is it, baby? Is it a bird? Oh, darling. What a big girl.
You see the two birds there?
Oh, she's so excited. Good girl. Little hunter girl. See? Yeah. You're so good. I know. Just coming back from picking up some food by the coast. It won't be long before we're not in Australia. I will be moving on, but I will really miss these amazing sunsets.
By my side, I'm not worried. I think we'll be able to find ourselves again. Blank expressions, empty words. Nothing can keep me away from you. I think I will be holding on to the one thing that I know is stronger.
Mount built, welded. So everything's welded together nicely, sitting on the mounts the way that I need it. What I'm going to do now is assemble the compressor side of it so that I can start figuring out piping. What I do need to do is get piping up into that single tank there. Once I know how I'm going to do my manifolds, I'll start working on the second tank. I just spoke to Tony in the yard, the sandblaster. What my plan is I need to get these painted, so the 2 tanks and the bracket that all of the compressor, electric motor and compressor head and so on sits on. What I need to do is get all of that painted, sandblasted and painted with 2-pack so that we don't have to think about rust in the engine room. I don't have a compressor that can run my sandblaster while I have all of this in pieces, so I'm going to get him to basically blast and prime everything and then I'll top coat it up. That's happening on Monday, so it's Thursday right now, so I'm hoping to get all of this built in the next day or so and then take it all out and stick it over in front of Tony's shed. He'll get it blasted on Monday, Tuesday roughly, and then I'll assemble it and we'll have a functioning compressor with big volume tanks. when I was in town last, I grabbed a few fittings. So we've got basically 90 degrees, we've got connectors, ball valves, weld-on fittings, sockets, and then a couple of cast T pieces. This is all 316 stainless. What I'm thinking is I'll use that to link the bottom of the tank, so this tank and then the second tank over there, and that'll become my drain system. I'll be able to have one drain that'll do both tanks. So I'm modifying the outlet pipe, so air gets sucked into these two cylinder heads, pushed through this pipe and down all the way down here, and it comes out the bottom just here. Now on the very bottom you end up with this one-way valve. It's like a pressure relief type one-way valve that gets screwed in like that and angles it back towards the side of the boat. What I need to do is create a pipe that goes from there up to the tanks. Now I can't feed it in to the manifold that's going to be at the bottom, because this has to be a water drain, it has to be the lowest thing. So I'm essentially creating two manifolds. Now I got some pipe that I went to the scrappy for, so I'm going to cut this and start building a vertical to come up, because what I want to do is I want to have the pipe coming in sort of up the side here somewhere like that, so that it's well off the bottom. I don't want it to go, I want the lowest part of the tank basically to be the drain. I don't want anything to get in the way of that. So that's the next plan, is start building the pipe that goes vertical to that tank. And that's what my vertical pipe is starting to look like. So it's coming out of that fitting at the bottom, screwed in down there, does a curve, comes up, bit of a bend, goes into a T, across to a ball valve, and then into a fitting on the side of the tank. Now that's roughly a foot above the bottom of the tank, and you can see I've just got a ball valve set up there for a drain at the moment, because I haven't built the manifold for down there. But that allows me to put air into that cylinder. I obviously need to do a second side of that going onto the other tank. I need to mount the other tank and then put the other side in, but that gives you an idea as to that part of it. I will brace it against the back of that mount, but for now that's going to work out all right like it is. Now what I do need to do is drill a hole in the top of this tank so I can start mounting all of this. So this is going to be the on-off switch, the regulator, valves, etc. This is the size that I need to drill into it and weld that in. Exactly the same as what I've done with this one here, but it's just going to be much higher in the tank and a bigger diameter. However, I haven't got a hole saw that fits this, so I'm going to do a run into town, and I also need to get some flanges to fit this top manifold that I need to build. And what I'm thinking is put the manifold for the air tools up near the roof here, so you'll basically plug everything in up onto the roof. You'll have your regulator and everything up there. It doesn't have to be anywhere near the actual compressor itself. It just makes it really handy if it's up there. It also means that it's easy to do the big diameter pipe that goes across for our air starter. This is the inlet pipe for our starter motor, so the starter basically screws onto this end here. It's a 1 inch ID. What I'm planning on doing is, you can physically see the size difference of those two. New manifold is going to be this size, starter pipe is this size, so basically we're going to have heaps and heaps of volume able to get across that starter, and then the biggest restriction is actually going to be right down near the starter motor itself. So it's time for an engine update. The main engine is down in Brisbane being rebuilt. It's currently stripped down completely. All of the parts are either waiting at Carl's shed or they're off at the machine shop to basically get machined. So that's the block, the crank, cylinder heads, they're off there as well, and pretty much everything else is at Carl's shop. He is waiting on parts basically to come back. Now, the thing that's sort of throwing a spanner in the works of all of this is Carl's just ripped a tendon in his arm, and he a couple of days ago came out of surgery, yeah, so he's out of action for a minimum 6 weeks. He's on light duty in 6 weeks time. He's able to do light stuff, so obviously low horsepower engines like Detroits and so on, I'm assuming. But he's not able to do anything high horsepower, therefore Cummins, for at least maybe 12 weeks. So hugely restricted in terms of that timeline now. So I've spoken to Carl and we've come up with a couple of different options. It's up in the air at the moment. We don't know which way it's going to go, but yeah, bit of a change of plans. So essentially what this means is we were hoping to have the engine rebuilt and back to Brupeg before Christmas, and then maybe fit it over Christmas, something like that. Carl's still aiming for that, so it may still be that we can make that timeline, or it may be that we're like it's blown out and we won't be able to do that. We might be delayed by a few months. Either way, we're not sure which way it's going to go. Now the flip side is, when I drive down to Brisbane to take the block and crank down of our old motor down to Carl, I'm also going to be picking up our new gearbox that's arrived, so I'll be bringing that back. So lots of new stuff is happening in the space of the next couple of weeks. This is because of the GoFundMe. None of this would have been happening without that GoFundMe, so you guys have just absolutely given us a kick in the pants to be able to get the things that we need for this boat and make it awesome. So thank you so much, guys, this is phenomenal. This is what I'm starting with. It's sort of scabby, rusty, old, sort of covered in junk 316 stainless heavy wall pipe. Bit of a polish up on the wheel on the grinder, comes up really beautiful. Just using a steel wheel, not using anything fancy, but just taking the time to give it a bit of a polish. Halfway through the job, I've got parts and chaos everywhere, hole saws, mild steel fittings, stainless fittings. I'm making a whole stack of manifold fittings, etc. that is eventually going to make its way into this tank and then work its way along this beam here, and then all of our controls is going to be up the front here. Pressure releasing out of it from the heat of the day. It tested itself. Lovely. So that came up pretty good. It's pretty blooming hard to get in behind and get that welded, but I've got it right the way around, so let that cool down. Then I have some rubber flanges. One thing I thought I'd show you is these fittings come pre-beveled, so there's like an angled cut on all of these surfaces that are like weldable surfaces. So when you go to assemble these, it's pretty straightforward. They're exactly the same measurement across the OD, so you can sit them on a flat bench like that and you know that they're going to be pretty much bang on lined up. But if you look really closely, you can see that there's a little V'd out dimple in there when you put them together like that, so you can weld. So perfect for being able to weld. Now when I'm assembling these pipes, I basically just tack everything together without filler rod. So I just give it a quick blip on the trigger on the TIG and it melts the two together and it holds it, and then I go around afterwards with my filler wire and basically fill it up. This thick stuff is 309. I use that for joining mild steel to stainless, and I use it on heavier stuff. I also have some 316 rod, which is much thinner. Here's a little piece of it there, so it's much thinner, and that's what I use on all of these joints because I don't need as much heat and therefore I don't need as much filler wire as well. When it comes time to joining them, basically clamp your earth on, and you want to be able to push down hard on that so that you know you can get a flat surface, and then I can just hold them with my second hand. Now I have two settings on the TIG torch, one very hot and one much colder when I actually start to weld. So the very hot setting is literally just for putting the TIG torch like so, and melting them together. So you can see that's enough to hold it. If I flip that over, do one more on this side, I know it's lined up now. There we have it. Perfectly joined, perfectly lined up and ready to go. So when you get your thin TIG wire, you see this stuff here is pretty thin, and you just run your beads all the way around, it fills it up nicely, you get a nice little weld profile all the way around. Now the reason why I have hot and cold settings, the hot setting is basically just to tack it, to nuke it like this, and it's far too hot to weld. If I welded with that setting, I'd end up with grey, horrible, awful welds. So I back it off quite a bit, and then I end up with just nice sort of tan coloured welds, sandy tan coloured welds all the way around. And the weld colour tells you a lot about the weld quality in terms of is it too hot or too cold, as well as the heat affected zone if you put too much heat into the stainless. Stainless overheats very easily. It's one of the things you've got to avoid, and that's why tack it together with a hot TIG torch, but then back your heat off when you go to weld it. This is a manifold that I've put together with exactly the same technique, so it's just bigger pipe, but you can see just small tacks everywhere that you need to have tacks to hold things. Spin it around, you can see I've got a couple of tacks on every piece of pipe just to hold everything nice and stiff. Now, on a flange like this, I do use filler rod just to make sure that we're able to fill any gaps, because the wee bit of filler rod there you can sort of see, and the reason being, spin it round, you can see down there there's a bit of a gap over the back there. You might be able to see my glove behind there, and I'm not going to be able to fill these are not precise fittings. Unlike the actual pipes, which are precise fittings, these flanges are pretty much just designed to be slip fit, so they know that a welder can fill that up, so they don't necessarily go bananas and try and make it perfect. What I do need to do when I make these flanges is I offset this pipe here is actually in from this face, and when I put the second flange on, I push the other pipe through, so the other pipe locates on this flange itself, so it kind of it protrudes through the perfect example, protrudes through, and then that stick out allows it to line up on this face here. So that's just a trick that I use. I actually learnt it off the guys that built the exhaust system on Brupeg. They do exactly the same thing, so that the gasket doesn't have to take all of the heat. The pipe sort of passes the heat beyond the gasket area. Don't have to do it in this particular instance. Air's going to leak out no matter what if it's wrong. However, it's just something that I like to do to help locate the pipes. So this is a good example of heat versus time. This was tacked together at 130 amps, very short sharp burst, so very small amount of time, very high amount of amperage into these pipes to melt them together, and the heat affected zone is fine. You can see if I take a pre-prepared pointer, you can see there's not really that much discoloration around that. The colour is a good colour, and you know that it's fused together and there's no real issues with that tack weld. If I was to continue welding at that, I would end up just absolutely nuking this stainless because the heat is too much and I'd be spending too much time moving around. I couldn't weld fast enough, basically, is the issue. Time and speed. So heat and time have a direct relationship. If I've got something really hot, I have to move fast in order to not nuke the steel. This here was welded at 80 amps, so you can sort of see 130 amps, 80 amps, but you can see there's more heat coming out around this weld. So I backed it off a little bit more. That's 70 amps, so it's a smaller weld, but you can still see I was too slow here, and this heat affected zone is quite big, and then as I come along here and start moving faster, it starts to come in closer to the weld. So it's not the best weld in the world, but it gives you a really good example of at 70 amps I'm starting to overheat this metal, and at 130 amps with one short sharp burst I'm not in any way overheating this metal, and that's how time and amperage relate to each other. There we go, relatively small welds, relatively small heat affected zone. So the heat affected zone is the area of discoloration you can see out the side here, and it's relatively uniform all the way around. Gets a wee bit bigger around the bottom where it's a bit slower and a bit harder to weld. Same deal with this one. They're not the prettiest welds in the world, but they're definitely going to be perfectly fine for what we're trying to do here. This one over here, exactly the same sort of thing. So fairly small, consistent sort of welds, heat affected zones relatively good. I basically need to work on my technique. In order to improve this, I need to work on my technique and be more consistent. So that's basically dabbing the rod more consistently, and also having the torch angle and the speed of travel more consistent. But that's not going to let go. It just doesn't look as pretty as what I would have loved. Rightio, manifold back together. So time to start assembling this onto the tank. Keen viewers will note that that ball valve is not stainless. It's brass, zinc plated, something fantastic, whatever. That's going to be replaced shortly. I'm using it as a placeholder. The no shop in town had it at 1 1/4 inch stainless ball valve, so I've got a couple on order, but until they arrive, we're just using this guy. Stainless bolts, and I forgot to put anti-seize on them. So next bit is how we get air out of this whole system. So I've got my on-off switch with my safety valve, the pressure gauge. I've got my air regulator for regulated supply. I want to have something like this, which is, you can sort of see it there, it's basically a manifold. So you have a single entry and then you have 4 exits. So you can have, you know, 4 different things plugged in or whatever. But I want to do 2 different air supplies. I want to do regulated and unregulated. So regulated is going to be air going through this thing here, which means, like, say for example, spray painting is a good example. You might want, say, 40 psi of pressure. This is what does the 40 psi. It takes it from 120 that might be in the tanks, takes it down to 40. So I'm going to do one 4-block that is regulated, and I'm going to do one 4-block that is unregulated. So that's for something like a rattle gun where you want as much pressure as you can get. I'm just going to bypass all of the mechanism for regulation, etc., and I'm just going to go straight from the air pressure from the tank straight into that manifold. This will still control the overall pressure that the machine turns on and off at, but it just means we're going to get potentially more flow going into the big tools like the 3/4 inch rattle gun and things like that. However, I've only got one of these 4 connector blocks, and it's aluminium with steel bungs in it. They're seized. There's no way I'm going to get that open without breaking them, and they're pretty cheap. I think they're like 20 bucks for a whole new one in town. So I'm going to go and do another drive into town, and we'll get the 2 things that we need to have the essentially there'll be 8 outlets, 4 regulated, 4 unregulated. And I also need to get some weld-on fittings so that I can connect the pipes in order to then go and have these fittings hooked in. But at the same time, I'm going to make allowance for the air starter. So I need to weld in a fitting that allows me to take an 1.25 inch feed from the tank all the way down through and over to the air start. So another trip into town, let's go and get that organised. Crikey! So I've done a town run. Man, I've bought some goodies. Right, so I've got 2 of these little manifolds, 4 connector manifolds. I had to go in a different shop and get the joiner. I also went to a different shop to get this little connector, which connects the pipe that comes off the back of the regulator, connects it onto the actual compressor itself. Had to go to a different shop again to get the pipe that connects it all. Then I went back to the first shop to grab some more of these stainless welded fittings, and I couldn't get like a cap, so I managed to get a reducer that has the size fitting that I need on the end, which means I can fit this to the back of it. So none of that probably makes any sense right now. I'll weld it all together and you'll understand it'll make a lot more sense then. One more thing before I forget. I had to get these little fittings. So it's a 90-degree fitting with a weld-in socket. The reason I had to get these is because Daniel in the States has donated a couple of gauges that I'm going to use. They are two the same. He actually gave us about 10 of these gauges. There's various different sizes, but these are the ones that I need for this job. They're 200 psi each. They're going to mount in there like that. Well, actually go like that. There'll be one on each tank, so I'll be able to see the pressure at the tank. And then this gauge will tell me the pressure that I'm getting at the regulator, and then this gauge will tell me the pressure that I'm getting out of the regulated fitting. So I have full visibility of the whole system all the way through. So thank you so much, Daniel. These are going to come in really handy. They are beautiful, beautiful gauges. So as you know, this is the outlet for the two tanks. Obviously tank 2 is missing, but that 1.25" pipe is the main outlet feed for the whole boat. Now, how do we use that 1.25" pipe when we want to use something like a rattle gun or an air tool? Introducing the air manifold from hell. Alright, I'll show you how this works. So, main feed comes in here, 1.25" pipe. We've got a T-fitting that's been welded up, and it basically heads off to a threaded fitting, which for now we're just going to put this on and cap that off. But that is going to be our main air start feed, so big diameter feed pipe. This here then goes through into from 1.25" down to, I think this is 1/4 BSP from memory, something like that. Goes into the back of the regulator. In the regulator we've got our on-off pressure regulator switch. We've got our gauge to tell us how much pressure we're getting up at this area of the manifold. And then on this side, the area that goes left or right. So on this side, on the right hand side, we've got our regulator, so we can turn this top here and dial this gauge up or down to limit how much air comes out of these guys here, these 4 connectors here. Or on this side, this is the unregulated side. If the tank is 120 psi, these are 120 psi. It doesn't matter what this one here is sitting at. So, and then off the unregulated side, we've got an air pressure relief valve. So if it ever gets too overpressurized, this thing pops off, and basically, like a blow-off valve on a turbo car, it basically releases an overpressure. This is a tiny, tiny blow-off valve for an air compressor. So what I'm thinking is manifold of death will mount up here somewhere so that I can essentially lock it up to this steel frame, but also protect everything so that it's not going to be out in the way of everything. Maybe even put it back slightly. It doesn't have to be all the way out. Back is a good idea. Let's do that. What I need to do is figure out where I'm cutting this pipe. We can cut it anywhere around there. Choppy choppy, weldy weldy. Now with fully cleaned up welds, that is the manifold assembled with all of the various ports and parts and things, and the air Nitto fitting manifold of doom. Just time to get this up onto the boat now. Right, well, apart from having nothing painted and everything being a rust risk and not having a second tank in there, I think this is starting to get somewhere. What I think I need to do now is make a bracket for that very top part to hold the pipe up to the roof. I have dropped it down slightly so that if I ever need to change that gauge, I can do that without having to disassemble the whole manifold assembly. You can just basically pull that gauge, unscrew it straight up, and then put a new gauge straight in. Rightio, made a little bracket, a couple of bits of 30mm by 3mm, get those welded on. It's going to be plenty to hold that onto the roof. So we've got the tank mounted. The compressor head is mounted with the electric motor on that bracket. We've got the stainless pipe going into the tank. We've got a temporary drain set up down there. We've got the big manifold at the top, as well as the outlet of doom. I think we'll call that quits for this week. So I'm pretty chuffed with how much I got put together of that system. It was a much bigger build than I thought it was going to be. I still need to do the second tank, and then I have to rip the whole lot out because it's getting sandblasted and painted. So I'm going to focus on getting the second tank in, get all of those inlets, outlets, etc. for that tank built, and then I'm going to take the whole lot apart, take it off to Tony. He's going to sandblast everything, paint it. I'm going to top coat it when it comes back. Then I'm going to assemble it into the boat properly. Before we go, I sent a photo of my progress to my mate Daniel in the States, and he said, change that copper pipe that links the stainless feed pipe to the compressor, because the compressor is rubber mounted so it's going to flex, and the stainless pipe is solid mounted so it won't flex, so that copper is going to work harden and break. So I will go into town and grab some sort of flexible pipe, whether it's an air hose or a braided stainless pipe, something like that, whatever we need to do in order to get that to be nice and safe, and it's going to allow flex in that system. So thanks for pointing that out, Daniel. I completely missed it, mate.
You got eyes like summer sky.